Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 4th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and you can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I want to preview tomorrow's show. I'm going to present to you a press release that I'm sending out to 250 publications regarding the travesty of justice and the Alamo ministry. And it's I've done it on YouTube, and I'm doing it also in print and also electronically to get out to over 250 stations, television, radio, print, all over the country, to see if someone will at least get me on their air to tell the ministry side of this story. But today I'm going to go back in time a little bit, and I got a real big treat for you today. You know, funny how things work out. Remember in the last couple shows I was telling you what's going on in the alternative media and how the story about the Vatican and a whole bunch of things regarding what really is going on between that organization and the rulers of the world, and what really it's all about, going back in history, doing my show as I've always done it for 10 years, and how certain alternative stations don't want to cover it because really they don't want to get to the truth. And so funny how things work out. When going back in time, when I was working with RBN, I had a run-in with the owner over this same subject, John Stadtmiller. And he basically called my hand, called me a one-trick pony, said if you don't start covering other stories, forget about it. He didn't want me talking about the Vatican as much. In fact, they brought on Michael Collins Piper, that guy from the American Free Press, to counteract what I was saying about the Vatican, and they were blaming the Jews for everything under the sun on that show. So that's what I was dealing with. So as I left there, when I left there, he decided to destroy all my archives. And unfortunately, I wasn't very computer savvy at the time, back in 2005 and 6. I lost all those years of work, that year of work, which many of my good interviews were done there. I did repeat some of them on Genesis, and when I left there, I still was able to recoup those. So serendipitously, I think, just through, well, how do you know, whatever it is, someone sends me, who kept most of my 2006 stories or radio shows, and I got them now on my website. But I was checking over one on June 20th, 2006. And you know I've paraphrased and talked about Tupper Saussy's book, The Rulers of Evil. It's a book you have to read. And I almost forgot about this interview, but I'm going to play for you. It was my second hour on June 20th, 2006. I presented part one of a two-part interview with Tupper Saussy. He was still alive then. Author of the book Rulers of Evil. Saussy's book took 10 years to write. He talks about how his research found the Jesuit order in the Vatican at the root of evil, the New World Order. Not only does Saussy pinpoint the enemy within, but he gives an outline. He outlines their plan as well as a method to counter the rulers of evil. Don't miss this interview if you want to lead a productive life in the midst. I'm going to play it for you. I forget a lot of what I said on it, and it'll be good for me to re-listen. And I should add that Saussy, his book is something you have to read. Now, I must add that some of the more astute, so to speak, as they say, as they claim, anti-Jesuit and Vatican people, in fact, the author of Vatican Assassins, was quoted as saying Tupper Saussy is a Jesuit coadjutor and his information isn't true. I find that quite interesting. I don't know why he would say that, but I'm sure there's some hidden agenda there somewhere. But let's listen to my 206 interview with Tupper Saussy.
According to my guest, Tupper Saussy, who wrote a book called Rulers of Evil, a war is being waged against you and your family. And he asks, do you know the enemy? Do you know how strong he really is? Do you know his strategy? Do you know the rules? In a Thomas Crichton, who has read Rulers of Evil, said this about Mr. Saussy's book. He said, Saussy gives a persuasive exposition about the who in the shadow governments. Rulers of Evil is a powerful and haunting book that will challenge your perception of authority and make you rethink the last 400 years of history, including the birth of America. With that, let me get to my guest, Tupper Saussy. How are you today, Tupper?
Fine, Greg. How are you?
Let's get right into this, talking about who are the real enemies, what is their plan, and what are we going to do about it. That's what we've been doing today. Tell us how Rulers of Evil fits into this, and enlighten us on who these guys really are.
Well, I think the facts pretty well bear out the fact that the people who really run the world are guided by the militant wing of the Vatican.
Okay,
that's pretty well established. A number of books have done that. I looked into it and found essentially the same thing.
Okay,
and the question is, what do we do about it? And
before you do that, though, let me get back to this story. I know you wrote another book called Miracle on Main Street regarding the tax situation, and got involved in some IRS difficulties. And that's what enlightened you to write this book. Tell us about that story, about how you started this.
Yeah, the Miracle on Main Street I wrote in 1979 and published in 1980, and it really caught on and became a grassroots bestseller. And the book envisioned what might happen if the grassroots Americans understood or learned exactly where Article 1, Section 10 in the Constitution came from.
Okay.
What prompted Article 1, Section 10 was the circulation of irredeemable federal money. In those days they were called continentals. And people couldn't make any kind of plans for the future. The value of their property was continually being subject to fluctuation because a debt issued, central bank issued currency, paper currency that's not redeemable in precious metals, has a value that no one can determine. And precisely, this is what was ruling the American property values since really about 1965, when the Coinage Act came in and made irredeemable Federal Reserve notes a legal tender for all debts, public and private. And at that point, Congress was given sort of a carte blanche just to will into circulation as much money as they wanted to, and this caused general inflation, and it caused real vertigo in our sense of what things were worth. Mm-hmm. And today, our money is completely irredeemable.
And Tupper, how did this get started for you? I know it had to do with some complications after writing that book, Miracle on Main Street. But tell us that story about your cousin and the federal prosecutor.
Miracle on Main Street was such a success because it had people going into local courtrooms and arguing that no state can make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. That's what Article 1, Section 10 says. Right. Article 1, Section 8 says that the Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof as against foreign coin. Well, in 1965, Congress stopped coining money, and the kind of money that the states could make a tender in payment of debts. And so we had a situation when Miracle on Main Street appeared of states enforcing payment in something other than gold and silver coin. And that's a flagrant violation of the Constitution. So people started going into courtrooms just all over the country objecting to the paper currency that the state was enforcing payments in.
Yeah,
and some very interesting cases came about.
Could imagine.
And it really infuriated the system, especially the people who were benefiting from an irredeemable currency. The framers called such people the friends of paper money. And so the Friends of Paper Money have a lot of power in the USA. And I got really concerned about what my position was with the IRS. And so I was sure that they were going to use whatever testimony I might give in a 1040 return against me in some sort of criminal trial. So I started started pleading the Fifth Amendment on the tax return. Well, it worked. 1 out of 3 attempts, and the IRS took me to trial. It's a misdemeanor to plead the Fifth on a tax return, and we weren't sure of that back then. We had to go through the criminal trial in order to find out. The jury said for the last 2 years that it was not. That was perfectly okay, and so they acquitted me. But for that first year, they thought that I had willfully failed to file a return. And in preparation for the trial, I met my prosecutor. This all happened back in 1984.
Okay.
And so the prosecutor introduced himself to me, and I began asking him where he was from. He was from Washington, but before Washington, he was from New Orleans, and I mentioned my cousin in New Orleans, who was a dear friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, you're kin to him." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we were ordained together." And I said, "Well, my cousin is a Jesuit priest. Are you a Jesuit?" He said, "Yes." Blink. Mm-hmm. And so I became very interested right then that a Jesuit could be prosecuting tax cases for the Department of Justice, working in effect for the IRS. And so I wondered, well, what other involvement in the political system do the Jesuits have? And so when I was supposed to show up at the Atlanta Federal Prison Camp in 1987, all those years later, to serve my 1 year, which probably would have been reduced on good behavior to 4 months, I decided that things were a little too heated at the time for me to submit to federal custody, and so I became a fugitive. And I remained a fugitive, America's least wanted man, for about 10 years. And during that period, I researched the involvement of the Roman Catholic Church in the formation of the United States, and it's really an amazing story. And I talk about what was going on with the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, at the time, during the earliest rumblings of colonial descent from England, began in 1758.
Yeah, take us through it a little bit. We'll whet our interest for your book. Go ahead.
Well, in 1758, the Jesuits got a new superior general who was a very skilled diplomat, an aristocrat from Tuscany, and his name was Lorenzo Ricci, the R-I-C-C-I. The British called him Lawrence Ricci, R-I-C-H-E-Y. And Lawrence Ricci started making some very subtle changes, and in 2 ways. First, he began a promotion for discrediting the Jesuits. When he was elected superior general, and by the way, the superior general of the Jesuits is an absolute ruler, and the Jesuit constitutions give him an actual greater power than the Pope.
Okay.
And the Jesuits are instructed in the constitutions to consider their superior general as the person Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And so that's why they call him the Black Pope. He's a Black Pope because he's not seen. The White Pope is the one that everybody knows the name of, but the Black Pope is the guy that rules from the background and directs the church in a hostile world, because the Jesuits really performed very well in what they call hostile missions, and England was a hostile mission, and the Jesuits were trained in those days at a school in Flanders, which today would be Belgium, and it was called Saint-Omer's school. They learned how to do invisible ink, and they learned how to wear disguises, and they learned how to do all sorts of psychological operations. They were well trained, and Jesuits were just all over England. And it was Lawrence Ricci who caused what I call blown cover as cover, the abolition of the Society of Jesus. A lot of enemies of the Jesuits talk about how the Jesuits have been run out of so many countries. Well, yes, they were run out of France. Yes, they were run out of Portugal. Yes, Spain. Yes, Austria. Yes, Germany. They were run out of these countries in order, I believe, to make the Jesuits more invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, at the time that the Jesuits were growing in disfavor with the Catholic Church, the Protestants in America were growing more and more dissatisfied with their British monarch. And so they began to sympathize with these poor, bedraggled Jesuits who were enemies of the Catholic Church, on the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the staunch supporters of the American Revolution was John Carroll. John was a Jesuit. He's trained at St. Omer's. His cousin, Charles Carroll, was the richest American, according to John Adams. And Charles was also trained as a Jesuit at St. Omer's and went on to the Inner Temple in London, became a lawyer. And all of the Carrolls, John's brother Daniel, was a sign of the Declaration of Independence. And Daniel, too, was a trained Jesuit. And the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, used not only the Jesuits, but also the Order of the Masons. The Masonic Lodge is a similar organization to the Jesuits. It's an absolute totalitarian hierarchy, and everyone in the various degrees of Masonry obeys a higher power, and that Masonic power culminates in what is known as the unknown superior. Nobody knows his name. All they know is that they get orders from him, and those orders are, I guess, delivered with some sort of code so that everybody knows that it came from the unknown superior. And I maintain that the unknown superior during the American Revolution was none other than Lorenzo Ricci. So the Masonic Lodge was just a wonderful way for Catholic militants to control the operations of Protestants, because Catholics were forbidden to join the Masonic orders, and Protestants knew that. They knew that they apprehended that to become a Freemason was to belong to a brotherhood that discriminated against Catholics. Catholics were definitely a despised minority in America, mainly because Protestants knew that if a Catholic would hold a political office, he would have to be obedient to a foreign sovereign, who is the Pope. And this is true. This is found in Catholic ecclesiastical law, that if you're a member of the Catholic Church and you hold political power, you are to use it to advance the rights and honors and dignities of the papacy. So, another thing that the Jesuits did, and I found very interesting, and I haven't seen many writers on the subject discuss, but the very first publication of Sun Tzu's Art of War in a Western language was published by the Jesuits. Mm-hmm. The translator was the Jesuit astronomer to the court of the Chinese emperor. And by the way, Jesuits have high positions in just about every profession throughout the world. They are no slouches. They're really cool people.
Let's spend the next 5 minutes talking about who these guys are, who the rulers of evil are, how you traced the papacy back from the Revolutionary War to present time. And then in the next half hour, let's discuss what we can do about it, how to react to these people, how we can change things. And then we'll, in the second hour, when you come back again, we'll get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of the many hundred years of history involving the Vatican and how they have infiltrated our country. So anyway, pick up where you left off for a few minutes and connect the dots.
I guess probably the most important pony that a person can have in understanding how the subliminal forces operate is Sun Tzu's Art of War. Sun Tzu is a legendary Chinese general who lived, they say, about 600 B.C., and he wrote his strategies for achieving victory. And he said that there's nothing more valuable than spies and ruses. You have to be deception. All warfare is based on deception. And, of course, Western people had no idea that there was such a thing as Sun Tzu until 1772, when General Ricci, Superior General of the Jesuits, Lawrence Ricci, caused to be published Joseph Marie Amiot's translation of Sun Tzu in French.
Okay.
Very, very important publication. Because here, if you could read between the lines, as you read how Sun Tzu said, if you are strong, make it appear that you are weak.
Mm-hmm.
In 1758, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, were a political entity unto themselves. They ran virtually every crown in Europe. They were almost a separate monarchy, and everyone knew this. Suddenly, things start happening. The rug appears to be pulled out from under them, and they are kicked out of one nation after another, and they fall into great disrepute. And in 1753, Pope Clement XIV abolished the Jesuits for all eternity. Of course, they were reinstituted in 1814, but nobody knew that at the time. And so in 1773, here we, all the patriots imagined that the militants of the Roman Catholic Church are no longer. Catholic Church looked like it was in incredible decline. So it suddenly became safe to hang out with guys like John Carroll and other Jesuits, because they were being held in disrepute by the most hated despot on earth. And this caused the Jesuits, I believe, become sort of the brains behind the orchestration of the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the readers will simply have to crack the covers on Rulers of Evil, because it really, I designed it to be a book that you wouldn't want to put down, and a lot of people keep it on the bedside table and refer to it frequently. Read 2, 3, 4 pages at a time. You can skip around. You don't have to read it, page by page. You can read it, go to chapter 18 and then back to chapter 4. And yes, there are some fairly tough historical passages with a lot of historical data, but I felt that it was necessary to put all that data in there in order to preserve my credibility, because if I skipped around, if I took liberties with the reporting of history, somebody might say, well, he's just guessing at this, but I'm not. Let me backtrack a minute. When you are examining the trail of a clandestine warrior, a guy who is trained to cover his tracks, you have to make some educated guesses, because they're not going to come right out and say, yes, we did this.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to always deny it. But whenever an act is done, it leaves certain fruits. And if you know where those fruits come from, you can get a picture of what really happened. And this is why I love the scripture. By their fruits you shall know them. We have to look at the fruits. We have to look at the outcome to see who started it. People are doing that with 9/11. They're looking at the outcome of 9/11, and they're saying, hey, Arab terrorists have gained less from 9/11 than anybody in the world, so they couldn't have been responsible for this. And then you work back and you see who's gained the most from this, and it points a searchlight at quite different parties. But we won't even get into that. But it's very exciting reading about the facts, reading about the acts and deeds of people who have indelibly influenced the history that we live in today.
And that's
so
the
many
history
people are so ignorant. They don't know. They live in complete uninformity.
Well, listen, we're going to try to inform those people, and we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this November 4th, 2015 day on our calendar. And I'm going back in time interviewing author Tupper Saussy regarding his book, Rulers of Evil. If you haven't read it, please get it. You can go online and find it. I find it to be a great exploration into the rulers of evil, including, of course, the Jesuit order. Now, Tupper, this interview was done in 2006, and I did a second part to it. Tupper passed away, I believe it was 2008 or 2009. And in that time, between then, I spoke with him a number of times through emails and private conversations, and found him to be one of the best resources of information that I ever ran across as a journalist. And I remember he was telling me one time what he really wanted was people to pick up where he left off. There's so much more, he says. And he said, go and grab some of the information I've given you and add to it. And if you find mistakes, let me know. He was open to that. And what an enlightening interview. Back to Tupper Saussy.
Tupper Saussy has written a book called Rulers of Evil. In Chapter 1, in chapter titled Subliminal Rome, you say, Tupper, that you discovered after several years of private investigation, you referred to that in the early part of the interview, the papacy really does run our foreign policy and our government. Let's save all the particulars for another time, our second part, and get on to something more important right now, and that is their plan, their New World Order plan, which, by the way, you say isn't new. It's been around a long, long time. And then what can we do about it as Americans? Are we helpless, or can we do something? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the plan is simply to maintain the status quo. It's not, as a number of commentators have, insisted, it's not to, take control of every man, woman, child on earth and restrict freedoms and all that. I think they would like for people to think that that's what they're after, because if they can get people alarmed and get them agitated and excited, you read Sun Tzu and you'll see that agitating your opponent is essential if you want to control him. If you can cause him to react, then he's in your jurisdiction. He's under your control.
Correct.
And so one of the things the Jesuits try to do is they try to precipitate reaction, because if they can cause the reaction, then they can control the reaction. And so I would suggest that the first thing to do is to understand that if you react, you're playing into their game, and you're playing into their hands. So I really don't react. I study, and I'm aware that their job mainly is the rulership of evildoers. That's why I call the book Rulers of Evil. There's a great deal of evil in the world, and evil is, again, I think the rulers of evil like to portray evil as, fangs and the horror story, the horror show, the slasher idea of evil, Satan worship and stuff. But evil is simply treating your neighbor unfairly, or participating in iniquity. That's what evil is, and a lot of people do that. And I think I'm getting into I'm approaching the age of geezerdom now, and I've been around for a long time. I've seen a lot happen in America, and I really think that American government has grown evil proportionately with the fall in the moral stature of the American people. I think America's become a fairly evil country, and if you get an evil country, you're going to have more evil rulers of evil to take care of them. And traditionally, it takes a really ingenious ruler, an ingeniously evil ruler, to rule evil people. If you try to rule an evil people by a good man, and because the good man, the prototypical good man, is Jesus Christ, and he says, "Forgive your enemies, turn the other cheek." You get a judge or a president who has that attitude, and he's going to get nuked. He's going to get walked all over. He's going to be totally ineffective, especially in a world of evil. Good people belong in the community of good people, and they need to. I think the essence of being a good person is to rule yourself. Don't look to some ruler, some governor, some official to rule your life. Don't let him adjudicate you. Scriptures in the New Testament are filled with admonitions not to let the ungodly rule your life. Well, very, very safely be shown and conclusively be shown that the court system exists for the ungodly, and just look at the symbols that they use. Trace the symbols. I have chapters in Rulers of Evil where I trace the symbols all the way back to the very earliest symbols and icons ever inscribed by man, and actually trace these icons back to what must have been the mark of Cain, because it was found in Babylon, and we know that Babylon is the land that Cain first occupied, and the earliest inscriptions we find there show somebody receiving power from a heavenly body, and the shape of that heavenly body is a cuneiform inscription. It's actually an 8-rayed cross, like the double cross.
Well,
and it's called Anu, And Anu means the god of heaven. He was the great sky god of the Babylonians.
You say too that this new world order is nothing new. I mean, this has been talked about since the days of Rome and maybe
earlier than that. Started with the mark of Cain, and Cain was given divine protections from anyone who would try to kill him.
And let's go on. The plan. We talk about genocide. Many people now talking about all the horrendous things going to happen, the paring down of the population by perhaps even a half to two-thirds. Now, genocide has gone on in generations past. Wars have gone on in generations past. Fascism has been around in America a long time, not just in the since 9/11. We just haven't been looking for it. Perhaps.
Well, one of the greatest identifiers of fascism in America happened in 1945 or 46, when the two fasces, the two axes, were installed on the walls on either side of the Speaker's dais in the House of Representatives. I mean, these are the emblems of militant fascism. And how come nobody raised his hand back then and said, "Hey, wait a minute, we just defeated fascism. Why are we installing the emblems of fascism on our walls?"
Right. Well, anyway, let's say, here we go, though. Here we have, look at what the New World Order at this point, look at the Jesuits who are in control, according to you, and many other researchers, the Vatican who's taken their stance, hiding behind the papacy, hiding behind goodness, when in fact they are doing evil through these people in our government and governments all around the world.
It's the thing is they're doing evil in order to regulate and manage evildoers.
Okay.
All's fair in war. And there's a wonderful Latin maxim, legal maxim about war. In time of war, the law sleeps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And our rulers of evil in America are very careful to say we're having a war on poverty, we're having a war against terrorism, we're having a war on drugs, the Cold War. As long as they can keep the people consenting to a state of war, then the law can sleep.
Exactly.
And so I think it's very, very important for a person to call in his boundaries, not extend his consent into rulers of evil, to let him rule himself according to the very best system that he can find. And if he finds that the American legal system is the best that he can find, well, then good luck. I think there's a better one.
And so here we go.
We celebrate diversity.
Right. So here's a person now. You say don't get trapped into their game of basically anger and frustration.
Right, Greg. Very important. Don't be angry and don't be frustrated, because that's what they want you. They want you there. Well, you're a lawyer. You know that a lawyer, a good litigator, loves to get his adversary angry.
Exactly.
Do that, he's won.
Because once you do that, once you get him away from the issues,
he can't think.
And you're always looking for your conclusion. You know where you want to end up. It's how you get there that's important, and not to jump to conclusions. And what I see here, and this is really good advice, I think, is that faced with these people, knowing it's been going on for hundreds of years, I want to get your reaction on how a person, first of all, how can, let's say, we are good people, and there are a number of good people in this country. They want to get rid of these evildoers. They want to get rid of this Vatican control. We have a hard time even knowing who they are, the way they operate. So what is your suggestion to a person listening who has come to the conclusion that he thinks he knows who the enemy is? He thinks there's a huge problem that fascism is going to take over all his rights. How do we react? What can we do from your perspective?
Well, fascism is not going to take over all his rights. If he behaves as an evildoer, fascism will take over all his rights. And but if he does well, if he does good, and he learns what good is, and he learns what the fruits of acting good look like, and he shows only those fruits, well, his rights are not going to be trampled.
Okay.
And so he really doesn't have much to worry about. He can really live a good and free life, and all I can do is just point to my own to my own life, because I live a very good. And my agent Peter Fleming wanted to call Rulers of Evil a how-to book. You read the history, do your homework, learn who all the dramatis personae are, and then pattern your life on that, and you can live a really wonderful, trouble-free life, because they don't want to take everybody's rights away. They're not going to take everybody's rights away. They're going to take the rights of people who give them a hard time away. I don't give them a hard time.
Right.
Jacques Ellul said that Jesus Christ looked on the Roman government with quiet derision. That's a good term, quiet derision. Just let them be. They're doing their job. And so they're ruling evildoers.
So basically, you say, let the evildoers rule the evildoers, and let's
Right.
grow
And guess what?
as good people and rule ourselves.
Right. If they come after me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, what am I doing that they perceive as evil?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I guess what I do is I say,
well, what if they perceive evil as you've exposed them? Do you understand what I'm getting at? Many people don't even get down this road of exposing who these guys are. Maybe they'll think that's evil.
Well, you see, here's the thing. It wasn't enough for me just to expose them. I started to stop. That's why it took me 10 years to write the book.
Okay.
Because you should see some of the early drafts of this book. As I made these discoveries, I was ranting. I was jumping up and down, and my fists were pounding on the table. I mean, there were exclamation points about every other sentence. Can you believe this? But the more drafts I did, the more I reflected and digested what's really going on, that these people really do have the right to be there. Hey, I'm glad evil people are ruling the evildoers around me. Because if good people were, the evildoers would just run all over them.
Right.
So it takes a thief to catch a thief. It takes a real wicked person to rule wicked people. And so I hate to call our politicians, wicked or evil people, but I'm sorry, I'm not a court of law, and I'm certainly not going to sentence them to any fine or punishment or anything like that. This is simply a conclusion that I've made based on their fruits.
Huh. I'll tell you what, it's kind of a progression just in talking with you, from learning what the evil do or who they are, and going through you have to go through a rigorous, basically taking yourself through a history lesson again, but one that's not presented to you. You have to uncover it because they hide it. And once you get to the point of figuring out who they are, then you got to figure out what to do against them.
That's it, Greg. That's so important. It does no good to know who they are. You have to let who they are determine a plan of action, and you got to be sure that your plan of action will not be offensive.
And what happens if all of a sudden we have all these good people out there who understand this? Something, it looks like to me, it's kind of like they dry up a little bit. Their power weakens.
You're absolutely right. Hey, you know what? The fields are ripe for harvest, because guess where so much of the evil is? Get ready. So much of the evil is in the Protestant churches.
Okay.
And you're probably going to get a lot of angry telephone calls as a result of that.
Well, explain yourself so that I can answer. I can always say you said it, so go on.
Right. But I say this to Protestant pastors, and I don't bother. Actually, what I say to the Protestant pastors is that you're part of you've been annexed by the Roman Catholic Church because you're keeping quiet about all this.
Exactly.
You're allowing the people to live in ignorance.
Right.
Ignorance is a form of evildoing.
And then there are many people who have talked about the infiltration of these pastors who have been infiltrated by the Jesuits, who actually do go into these churches and try to destroy them.
Sure.
So, yes, there is that kind of I had a Baptist minister just on last week who was talking about that, and he was at the Baptist convention that was going on in North Carolina, and he was saying, it's hard for him to function as a good person in this evil world because the police are constantly hassling him for housing homeless when down the street they're allowing drug dealers to go free and to pass on drugs. So, yes, you are so correct when you say it is that, and that pastor, I think understood the same thing you're talking about. He's living in a good world.
There's charity. I've got a problem with the way Americans perceive charity because there was a woman in the Bible that came to Jesus and said, "Please help my daughter," and Jesus said, "No, I only came to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And I mean, here's Jesus asked to do a charitable act, and he refuses. Of course, the lady persisted and begged him and said, she got Jesus to help her, but his initial reaction was not to do anything for her. Why would he act that way? I'll tell you why. Because he knew that there was a system set up to care for people like that. She didn't show him at first blush evidence that she was a member of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It was her later testimony, her later confessions that convinced him that she was worthy of that kind of healing, that she was not going to go to the state for her healing. So the state is set up to handle homeless. Many charitable organizations, not necessarily churches, are established, are set up to handle homeless. I think the churches have a much more important task, and that is to properly enlighten their congregations as to what's really going on.
Here we go with this problem of our financial situation. America seems to be in a position where the economy is about to collapse. Would you agree with that? And how do you handle a situation like that after knowing who these guys are and discussing, what we discussed in this last hour?
Well, in the first place, I try to remain as productive as I possibly can. I mean, I'm a musician, and I'm an author, and I'm an artist, and so I remain productive in these areas and assure that my time is creating value. So once that's decided, how do I handle the money thing? And I just am very careful, especially in light of recent developments since the M3 is not being announced any longer by the Federal Reserve. I believe we're going to have just rampant inflation, and I think it's a very, very good idea to convert whatever dollars you might have into gold and silver, and or other precious metals. But I think gold and silver are probably the simplest and most convenient. I like to keep an investment life very simple as possible. Mm-hmm. That leaves more time to do your productive stuff. So I'm not very concerned about a crashing economy. If it crashes, it'll crash all around me. But it's I don't believe it's going to impact me because I'm going to be productive, and so there'll always be a need for the stuff that I do, and so I'm just really not worried. I'm not too worried about it. And I don't think I have delusions either. I don't think this is a false optimism. I think it's really quite real. I can remember, 40 years ago, people were talking about everything was going to crash, and nothing really crashed. Things just got a little more evil, a little more sleazy. A lot of newer inventions came about. A lot of beauty was created. A lot of interesting, exciting things came about. And a lot of people got poorer, and I think a lot of the wrong people got richer. And that always happens when you have a fluctuating medium of exchange. You have people who can get close to the fountainhead of credit creations, and they really don't do much at all, and they get a lot of money running through their hands.
So anyway, in our last minute here, basically, you recommend that people read history, read this book, figure out who their enemy is, and then deal with it in a manner that doesn't play into their hands, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm done over there in 2006, and exactly some of the things that I remember back in 2006, didn't sit too well with some patriots, and they were saying, and it wasn't exactly his research on the Vatican. If you go to his book, you can see it's thorough, it's a good book to have. Put it up against all the other information you have. Some of it jives with other information, others it's a much different. So you're going to have to take a look at it, read it, and then make up your own mind, which I really recommend. We got to become free thinkers. But people then were saying, well, what does he mean when he means he doesn't upset them, or he doesn't want to well, what I'm thinking, and they're not going to bother you unless you do that. Well, here's what I've said many times on the show, and I remember saying it to him back then, and he agreed. What I said was, yes, I agree with you. You can know who these people are. You can do research calmly and objectively. Don't get angry. Do this. But I said, I think the line is drawn with these evildoers when you become very, very popular and you have an enormous, or you have a very large following that's starting to believe this. And I think, and he agreed. He said, perhaps you got a point there. And Tupper's the type of person that would never say that they were targeting him. However, he did pass away 2 years later, and he was in very good health. But they became popular, so I think we have to kind of amend what he said a bit, and he agreed with me on this, that if you do become very popular, they will target you. And that's because they have to, like he said, keep the status quo. The status quo won't stay the same if millions of people start thinking on their own. And so that's what he was talking about. And when you get into his book, which I've read a number of times, and it is true, it's a book that you can keep by your bedside and go from chapter to chapter. I read it through one time, and then it took me a little while because there's a lot of things you want to go back to and look at. And I found that some of the more intriguing parts of the book, where when he was talking about how Rome marginalizes the Bible, and then he talked about the mark of Cain, and he began to talk about some biblical interpretations. Now, some of these, the one on Cain, you don't get anywhere in the Protestant churches, anywhere. And I even talked to some people outside of the Protestant churches that were enthused and excited about the way Cain, the mark of Cain, and the story of Cain and Abel was looked at. And you can go to chapter 24 in his book and get that. And many, many things. I enjoyed the Lorenzo Ricci's war, and I talked to him extensively about the uncovering of this story and how it flies in the face of many people who are researching the Vatican and say, well, you just have to go back to the founding fathers and George Washington, and they were opposed to the Vatican, when Tupper and other researchers, including myself even prior to meeting him, felt that they were in the pocket of the Vatican. And that going back to the founding fathers, the country was set up to rule evildoers. And it is set up to be a front for freedom, and a front for independence. However, if you, for example, belong to, let's say you are a DHS worker, doing all those evil things according to your government's laws, lying about, just look at the Alamo ministry story, lying about all those kids being abused. They're being ruled by their higher-ups who are evil. They are performing the evil deeds, and the people in the country that are applauding this, numerous people applaud. That's why this Alamo ministry story is so important. You can see how these people carved out a life of good. And I suggest that, one, if they had not criticized the Vatican, or if they didn't grow popular, if they remained a small ministry of 10 people whatsoever that didn't reach. They reached millions of people all over the world. This couldn't go on. The status quo was being dented. That's why they were targeted, and Tupper agreed with me on that. And there's others that fall into that category. But according to, and I agree with him, if the idea of the Constitution and the idea of all this stuff, you will not have those protections if you follow this system. And if you think, like he said, the legal system is your way to do it, then good luck to you. And he's right. I mean, I was a journalist. I got a law degree. Worked in many law firms. I saw it. There is another avenue where you can live and be free in this country. If you're not being ruled by them, if you don't allow yourself to be, if you don't allow yourself to be confrontational in a sense where you march on them, where you want to fight them, where you get angry, where you're trying to overthrow them, you have no problem. Because the point is, once you understand them, you realize you can't overthrow them. And if you try, what they will say is they'll turn the table on you and say, you are not an American, you don't, and plus, you're a terrorist, and plus, you don't believe in God. If you're doing this, because we believe in God. They hide behind God. But the question becomes, if you understand it, why did God give them protection to be there? In the beginning, with Cain and all of the people that have followed in these governmental roles of leadership. Why do you think that's happened? Ask yourself that question. I have my own ideas about it. Maybe I'll bring it up on another show, because I only have a couple minutes and I don't have time. But I will say this, there is a reason why God gave Cain and gives all of these leaders protection. And that doesn't sound right, does it? It flies in the face of, you won't hear that on a Protestant pulpit, because they depict certain leaders as good. They depict our leaders as good, and they use that one phrase, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, blah, blah, blah. But the point is they're not. They can't be, because they wouldn't be there if they were good. That's why a congressman that goes to office with all these good intentions either joins that evil club, and if he doesn't, he's either killed or he doesn't work there anymore. And the one who stays and says, had all these grandiose ideas of freedom and doing all these things, and he stays in Congress for 20 years, the people in his district will go, how come he doesn't do anything anymore? How come he's, because he has joined the evil club to rule people. Now, they have you in this Hegelian dialectic, and we didn't get into that subject. I talked to him over the phone about that. And that's a Jesuit ploy of always working both sides of the coin. The Art of War, Sun Tzu's Art of War, was not translated into French and English for no reason right before the Revolutionary War. And if you think the Founding Fathers are only the ones that you hear about in our textbooks, you're wrong. Because I think Lorenzo Ricci wasn't killed or died in prison like they said he did. And, if you go to the prison where they had him, I've been to Rome, I know exactly the place they're talking about. It's connected to the Vatican. He most likely was given he just changes his identity, and he was considered the professor when he came to the States and talked with Franklin and the rest of them. And there is one book that talks about, outside of this book, that puts him there when the history books say he was dead. That to me is more plausible than what we read, because you see the fruits, like he said, of what's happened. The beast, since it grew from one diocese right after the Revolutionary War, to now, it's like encompassing this whole country, with culminating with the Pope even coming here to speak to Congress. You know the fruits here, what have happened. We're all out of time. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.